Well, good evening and welcome this evening. I'm Sandy Sanders, Mayor of Fort Smith, and I have the pleasure of kicking off this first session. This is the beginning of a three-part series presented by the U.S. Marshals Museum, and I think you're in for a real treat, not just tonight, but for the following programs as well. This program is being live streamed, and it's being tonight. We're seeing this at the University of Arkansas Little Rock, Northeastern State University in Broken Bow, Carl Albert State College, Rogers Public Library, and the live streaming is provided by the Triple S Alarm Company of Little Rock. So let's thank Triple S for doing this. And this is a free event, and the others coming up, we would encourage people to be sure and attend those as well, so that I think you'll really find them enjoyable. And thankfully to the Marshals Museum, they have wrapped this as part of the bicentennial celebration in Fort Smith. Last Saturday, we had a convention center full of people visiting, enjoying the 5 civilized tribes, and the Cherokee representative told me that was the very first place ever that all 5 tribes have been in the same building at the same time, doing the same kind of presentation on their culture and heritage, and they want to do it again. So those are the kinds of things that the bicentennial is trying to bring to people in Fort Smith. We have other activities that will be happening throughout the year. The website is gofortsmithar.com. So I would encourage you to check that for souvenir items and for the calendar showing the different kinds of events that are on tap. So gofortsmithar.com and enjoy the facilities provided for the bicentennial. Tonight we have a very special speaker, and kicking off the series of lectures for the U.S. Marshals Museum is Catherine Foreman Gray. In the past, she was a park ranger. Guess where? Right over here. She has served as the interpretive supervisor for the Cherokee Nation and is now the history and preservation officer for the Cherokee Nation. And I guess for those watching in over there meant the Fort Smith National Historic Site. So additionally, she serves as the 5 tribes representative on the U.S. Marshals Museum Board of Directors. Would you please welcome our guest speaker tonight, Catherine? Where did I lose it? There she comes.
OCO, everyone. As the mayor mentioned, I am the History and Preservation Officer with the Cherokee Nation, and I also serve on the Board of Directors as the representative for the 5 tribes on the U.S. Marshals Museum Board. I'm excited to be here tonight to introduce Shannon Buell, who is going to be talking about one of my favorite topics here in Fort Smith. As the mayor mentioned, I was over at the Fort Smith National Historic Site, and one thing is for certain, this history is contagious. This is a very exciting topic. A lot of people aren't aware, though, that the Cherokees did have a justice system prior to European contact and influence. And Marshal Buell will talk a little bit about the blood or the clan law that was in place before our official judicial system began to take shape in the early 1800s. This became famously known as the Light Horse Police. The Cherokee Nation was the first to establish a tribal light horse. There were many nations that did follow suit and began to establish their own tribal light horse soon after. And many of our tribes will still use that term today. We currently use the Cherokee Nation Marshal Service, but there are other tribes that do use this term. Cherokee Nation's history with the U.S. Marshal Service is a long one. We haven't always been on the best of terms either. The Going Snake Massacre in 1872, there were 11 men who were killed that day. A lot of people don't realize, even though they weren't all on the Cherokee side, there were 8 of those men were Cherokee citizens. We also had the Ned Christie incident, who was a Cherokee senator and patriot, and he was also a proud member of the Nighthawk Katua Society. He was accused of killing the U.S. Deputy Marshal Dan Maples in 1887, and he would spend the next 5 years trying to clear his name and then also fighting off the marshals who would visit his home. Finally, in 1892, it took a few dozen deputies, dynamite, and a cannon to bring Ned down. Later in 1922, a Cherokee freedman, Dick Humphrey, would come forward to clear Ned's name. But the history books don't always talk about this. This is why educational events like this are important. I'm very grateful to the U.S. Marshals Museum for inviting the Cherokee Nation here tonight to tell our story, to allow the Cherokee Nation to tell our own story. Marshal Buhl has been active with the Cherokee Nation Marshal Service for almost 18 years. He is the second constitutionally appointed Marshal of the Cherokee Nation and currently oversees all law enforcement, emergency management, and security divisions within the tribe's jurisdiction. In addition to serving his tribe, Buhl has also served this country and is a veteran with 12 years of service in the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Cherokee Nation Marshal Shannon Buell.
Good evening. Real quick before I get started, I'm also a professor at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, so if I get long-winded, I'm sorry. That is part of that. First of all, the Cherokee Nation is very honored to, one, be out of the state of Oklahoma and in Fort Smith. This is a really nice time when I can cross the river anytime I can. So thank you for inviting us. As a tribe and as a people, we appreciate when we're included in things absolutely as important as this. Yes, I am Cherokee. I'm a proud member of the Cherokee Nation. And I've been there, it'll be 18 years in August. I started out as just a deputy marshal, just fresh out of the military, didn't know what I wanted to do. And a buddy of mine was a Cherokee marshal, and he says, "How about the marshal service?" I said, "I don't even know what that is." He said, "Well, we'll give you a gun and a car, and you can drive fast." And I said, "Yes, let me have that." And that's how I started. And I learned quite quickly that I didn't know what it was to be a Cherokee marshal. And I didn't know what it was to be named a deputy marshal. For the longest time, when you hear the term deputy marshal, you picture John Wayne or one of the Westerns. You picture a U.S. Marshal, so I was confused when I started about what the term Deputy Marshal meant, especially what it meant to the Cherokee Nation. And hopefully I'll be able to tell you all what it means tonight. Okay? So the beginning of the Cherokee Nation is before the United States was a country. The Cherokee Nation as a tribe has always prided themselves on establishing a rule of law. Also being very proud to have an education. We're a very literate people, even though this cop up here in front of you might mess up tonight. We believe in rules, education, and the protection of our people. So before the United States was the United States, we had what was called clan laws or blood laws. What that meant was that the victim in a crime or an infraction had the duty to say what they wanted out of that infraction, what they wanted the suspect to have to do. And it was the family of the suspect to administer that law. Okay? So that's kind of how it worked for a long, long time. In the early 1800s, the different clans of the Cherokee Nation got together and formed a centralized government kind of mirroring the United States government. Okay? So from around 1804, the Cherokee Nation had a three-pronged government. We had an executive branch that held the chief and the deputy chief. We had a legislative branch which held the council. And then we had a judicial branch which held the judges or the people that determined fate in criminal proceedings in 1804. Okay. In 1808, the chiefs and the warriors passed an act appointing regulators. When I hear that term, I remember the movie Young Guns, where they said regulators ride or whatever it was. But these regulators were, prior to them being called light horsemen, The Regulators went out, and their charge or their oath were to protect widows and orphans, to handle any horse thieves or cattle theft, and to put people to death who disagreed with them, which that's a little different use of force than what we can use now in law enforcement. But it was a great power and a great responsibility to be able to do that in the early 1800s. Being a police officer anyway is a great responsibility. There's a writer named Dave Grossman. He wrote a book called On Killing, The Psychological Effects of Killing in Combat. And in that, he talks about the history of the badge and why. This gentleman right here has a jacket with the U.S. Marshal badge on it, and it's on his left breast pocket. And the reason why, if you see a police officer, you go down to Fort Smith, you see a police officer, you see one of my Cherokee Marshals in uniform, they will have their badge over their left side. And the reason this is because the old knights of old, there was no such thing in Old England as being left or right-handed. So you were always right-handed. If you were born left-handed, sorry, you're right-handed. And the knights would carry the sword or the axe or the spear in the right hand, and on their left hand they would have the shield, and on that shield would be their king or their flag, the house that they served. So fast forward to now, the shield that police officer uses in your community is on their left side to harken back to that shield that old knight carried. And on that badge shows the queen or the house or the lords that officer serves to go out and do good things in that community. Whether that badge says or that shield says Fort Smith or the United States Marshals or the Cherokee Nation Marshals. So it's incredible when you start looking at history of law enforcement, especially history in Indian country law enforcement, how it all ties together. So I spend way too much time looking at that kind of stuff. It's kind of strange. So not long after the Regulators were formed, they changed the name to Light Horsemen. And these Light Horsemen were a captain, a lieutenant, and 12 special deputies that rode under the authority of the captain of the Light Horse. And they became what's the predecessors of the current Cherokee Nation Marshal Service. Like Catherine was saying earlier, other tribes had light horsemen. We were the first, I'm proud to say, but right now if you go over to Muskogee, the Creek Nation, they're still called Light Horse. So on their police cars you'll see the Creek Nation Light Horse. The Chickasaw, if you see theirs, they're Light Horsemen. If you see the Choctaws, they're Light Horsemen. We will tell you why we're not calling ourselves Light Horsemen anymore in just a little bit, but that's kind of where it went from the Regulators up to the Light Horsemen. In about 1874, if you kind of look at the time frame, that's about a year or so before Judge Parker took over the court in Fort Smith. Before that, in the 30s and 40s, 1830s, 1840s, we had the Trail of Tears. If you don't know that, just please come to one of our museums and we can talk on that in depth. A very horrible experience of the Cherokee Nation. But what a lot of people don't know is before we left on the trail, our government appealed that decision all the way to the Supreme Court. So even at its earliest conception of the Cherokee Nation being a three-pronged government, we were fighting for our people. We were fighting for freedom. And we took it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sided with the Cherokee Nation and said, no, Georgia, you can't send the Cherokee Nation away. And President Jackson said, Supreme Court, I appreciate your opinion, but you don't have a standing army. I'm going to move them. And they moved us. So as soon as we got to Oklahoma, which wasn't Oklahoma at the time, it was just Indian territories. As soon as we got there, based around Tahlequah, Oklahoma, the Cherokee Nation started their same form of government they had before the removal. They wanted the executive branch, they wanted the judicial branch, and they wanted the legislative branch. One of the truest definition of sovereignty of a people is the ability to govern your people and the ability to protect those innocent people within your community or culture. That's the basis of sovereignty. So unlike a lot of police departments around the nation that really don't think about sovereignty as an important issue, they think about jurisdiction, they think about state or city statute. Unlike those individuals, tribal police always think about sovereignty first. What do we do to increase sovereignty, or what do we don't want to do to maybe risk sovereignty? So that's the first thing we think about that's a little different than the average police officer out on the street. We're very fortunate in the Cherokee Nation because we believe in a holistic form of criminal justice. The Cherokee Nation does not have jails. We did back in Indian Territory time, but we don't now. When we have to use them, we contract with local sheriffs to use their jail facilities. But we always try to find other ways to help our citizens. Very few, in our belief, need to go to prison for life or get the death sentence. A lot of lower crimes, in our opinion, the community should bond together, like the old blood or clan laws, and help facilitate that citizen to hopefully become a better one. Now, I say that with a caveat. Some people need to go to jail. I wouldn't be in this business or carry a gun if that wasn't one of our duties, and it very much is, but we always, as a tribe and as a culture, look for other avenues to right a wrong. So that's one thing that we kind of differentiate from normal police work. I've been told, and I'm not on the board for the U.S. Marshals Museum. I know a little bit about it. I've been told one of the reasons why it was picked, Fort Smith was a place for the museum, is twofold, I think. One is they lost more U.S. Marshals in the line of duty during Indian Territory time, 1875 to about 1900, here than any other time in history. And that's very sad when we think of policemen and women that die every day on the streets of the world. But to have so many die in such a short time frame is sad beyond belief. It is also sad that not only did the nation lose U.S. Marshals, but we also lost Cherokee Marshals, or what was then Cherokee Light Horse. We have 13 Cherokee Marshals on the Federal Memorial Wall that's been killed in the line of duty, 12 of which were killed at the time frame of Judge Parker's court. So 12 of our marshals has passed due to Indian Territory and the stuff that was going on at the time. That's why we decided to go back to the term marshal. It was never in our history. We could have been called regulators. It would look funny on the badge, but we could have been called regulators. We could have been called light horsemen. There are several things that we could have been called, but we decided on marshal, mainly to harken back to that cooperative partnership that we had with the U.S. Marshals right before statehood. And the fact that my tribal members died right alongside the U.S. Marshals in Indian country is very important. And it's also very important in the history of my agency. If you go into my agency, you will see pictures just like this one here. This is Fort Gibson. This is a payday at Fort Gibson. These are some of the U.S. Marshals and Cherokee Light Horse. You'll see these blown up all around my office. So the history of my agency is very important to every deputy marshal that start. We have a Indian Territory Prison Museum in Tahlequah. And in that museum, if you have a chance to go to it, it's a fantastic museum. Please don't look at the little monitor and you first go in the room because it has me. and I'm very nervous on it, and I sound very bad. I mean, I don't even like watching it, but don't watch that, but look at the other stuff, because it talks about my history. It talks about law enforcement in Indian country, and it's important to us anyway. So, 1907 was kind of a bad year in Indian country with the 5 civilized tribes. Congress asked a question. They said, can Native American tribes govern their own people? They never answered that question, but the Cherokee Nation and a lot of tribes took it as we cannot. So around 1907, it was taken, law enforcement and the tribal courts was taken away from the Cherokee Nation, and it was ran by Indian police located in Muskogee, Oklahoma. They covered the 5 civilized tribes. It was Cherokee Nation, Chickasaw Nation, Osage, Creek, and Choctaw. And they kind of ran the law enforcement. So the Choctaw Light Horse went away in 1907. The Cherokee Nation Light Horse went away. All those agencies went away. And that stayed dormant until the mid-70s, and the Cherokee Nation started a security department that was deputized under the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office to kind of do security around the complex, the W.W. Keeler complex. That went up until 1986. 1986 was kind of a banner year, I guess, that you'd call it, for the Cherokee Nation. We had a ball field, it still is a ball field, called Greasy Ball Field over in Adair County, and it was Indian country. Now, what Indian country is land held in restriction for the sole use of Indians, for tribal entities, okay? So it's not the land that you stand on in Oklahoma. If it is Indian country, it is not the state of Oklahoma, okay? Now, the map for my jurisdiction covers this entire chunk of land right here. 9,000 square miles is what my primary jurisdiction is. If you look at the map of Oklahoma, city of Tulsa, you go north up 75 Highway to Kansas. At the Kansas border, you take a right. And you go to Missouri border, and you take another right, and you come right down here across the river from Fort Smith. You take another right, you go 40 to the Muskogee Turnpike, go up Muskogee Turnpike through Muskogee and back to Tulsa. That chunk of land is what we cover. 14 counties, 9,000 square miles. I tell you, at my staffing levels right now, I have 33 sworn marshals, to include me. That is me and 32 for 9,000 square miles. So it takes us kind of a special type of person to even want to be a Cherokee Marshal, because we're kind of a lonely group. We travel by ourselves a great deal. I hate to say it, but you have to really like guns, because you have a lot of them on you when you go places, because you don't have backup. It's not like Fort Smith PD that they get in a fight with a suspect and they can call on the radio and say help, and they can have a backup 20 seconds, 30 seconds, minute at tops. I've ran cold for 3.5 hours to get to a marshal that needed help. That's a long time to drive with your lights going and a siren going, trying to get to help a friend. So it's a different mentality that we do at the Marshal Service than most law enforcement. So, Greasy Ballpark, Adair County, there's a Native American. He's intoxicated, and he's causing hate and discontent at the ball field. People at the ball field called the Cherokee Nation, said, hey, we need help with this guy. At the time, the Cherokee Nation did not have a law enforcement entity. Didn't exist, 1986. They called Adair County Sheriff's Office. Adair County Sheriff sent a deputy down to investigate. This deputy is Bill Jack McLemore, and he attempted to arrest Ronnie Ross. Mr. Ross was very intoxicated and resisted the Adair County deputy, and the Adair County deputy shot Mr. Ross in the leg and then took him to jail. in Stillwell, Oklahoma. Goes to trial. Mr. Ross gets an attorney and sues, and it goes all the way to the 10th Circuit in Denver, Colorado. And the 10th Circuit in 1989 came down and said, Adair County, you have no jurisdiction on Greasy Ball Field, for that matter, any restricted Indian land in the state of Oklahoma on an Indian. So what that meant is, if I'm Indian and I'm a suspect on Indian country, the state of Oklahoma can't touch me. It's not the state of Oklahoma. So when this got handed down in 1989, the Cherokee Nation, in its infinite wisdom, said, oh, we messed up in 1907. We've had this all along. And very quickly, under Wilma Mankiller, decided to reform the law enforcement entity, write the criminal codes, and revamp the judicial system for the Cherokee Nation. At the time, she picked members of her team to look at it and see how to do it. And there was discussions at that time, 1989, about what to call this new law enforcement entity. It makes it a strange paradigm when, if you look at the history of law enforcement in Oklahoma, the Cherokee Nation was the first law enforcement entity in the state of Oklahoma. We were active law enforcement before it was a state. But now we're going to be one of the newest law enforcement entities in the state of Oklahoma. So I always tease the director of OSBI because they always like to say they were the first law enforcement entity in the state of Oklahoma, and they were state law enforcement agency. But I always like to poke fun at him because we were the first. But now we have this new entity in 1989 with the Ross v. Neff decision out of the 10th Circuit, and they didn't know what to call this new entity. They looked around, they seen what was going on, they seen, yeah, we could call them regulators, we could call them light horsemen, and someone came up with the idea to honor that relationship between the Cherokee Nation and the U.S. Marshals under Judge Parker, and those lives that were lost that are still on the Federal Memorial Wall because of that agreement, and because of that bond of brotherhood that they had back at the turn of statehood. So those discussions led to the forming of the modern-day Cherokee Nation Marshal Service. Now, a lot of people poke fun at us because they say, you're trying to be a U.S. Marshal. No, we're not. Never would we assume that we're U.S. Marshals. We're very proud of the words Cherokee Nation Marshal Service. We're very proud of the badge that we hold. The badges, quite frankly, are one of the only badges left in existence that's solid silver. It's kind of cool. It's not pop metal. So it's kind of a badge of honor that you get when you become a Cherokee Nation Marshal. And it becomes a lifestyle. It's not just a job. Wilma Mankiller, there's been books written about Wilma. Good, bad, or indifferent. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's where I was born and raised before I went in the Army. I can tell you I was in a lower middle class household, but I learned one thing from my father. It's to do a job. If a man pays you to do it, you do it. You don't make excuses. What you do becomes your life. Very honorable man. To this day, if he tells me it's raining outside, I don't have to question him. Very humble man. That's one side. My mother instilled in me a love of everyone else but myself, that I should always look to help somebody else. And at an early age, I knew what I was going to be, and that was an infantryman. So at 17, a junior in high school, my mom and dad had assigned me into the infantry in the U.S. Army. I went to basic training my junior year. When I graduated high school, I left. So I actually started carrying a gun professionally at 17. I'll be 49 on Saturday. My wife's back there. She's actually the director of public safety for NSU. She's a lot meaner police officer than I ever thought about being. So I've carried a gun from 17. I'll be 49 on Saturday. I have not set it down yet. Someday I will, and I'll pick up a fly rod or a set of golf clubs or something, but now I still carry this gun. But early on in life, I found the importance of one dedicated to a higher purpose and the love of my fellow man and woman. I don't believe in prejudice. I don't believe that people should be segregated for issues. When I found out I was going to come and talk today, I was confused. One, because I'm just a tribal cop. How's that? At the end of the day, that's what I am. I get up every day, I put my badge on, I put my gun on, and I go work the tribe's criminal justice system. Me and my wife was at Gilcrease Art Museum on Saturday because she likes to torment me more than anything in this world. And I kind of had one of those awe moments. Norman Rockwell has an exhibit at Gilcrease Art Museum right now. I don't know how long it's going to be there, but we went and seen that. And one of his pictures that Norman painted was called "The Problem We All Live With." And the picture represents Ruby Bridges. She's a 6-year-old African-American female in New Orleans. And in the picture, she's walking in front of a wall. And she's on her way to the William Frantz Elementary School there in New Orleans. It was November 14th, 1960. And on this wall, you can see where there's people have thrown tomatoes. And she was going to an all-white school. But what struck me about this painting wasn't the little girl. It was the 4 brave men that had bandages on their left arm that said United States Marshals. There were 4 U.S. Marshals that day that escorted this 6-year-old little girl to an all-white elementary school. That's why I'm proud to be here. That's why I'm proud to be called a Cherokee Marshal, not just a Cherokee Light Horseman, which we could have very easily been called. But that bond that we got before statehood is still alive with the Cherokee Nation. I can tell you that the bond that we have with the Northern Oklahoma District of the U.S. Marshals and the Oklahoma Eastern District out of Muskogee is still that strong. One of my deputy marshals is assigned to the Fugitive Task Force for the Eastern District U.S. Marshals. He spends more time over there than I don't ever see him anymore. I mean, he's always gone. But that commitment that we give each other continues to this day. So I think it is very, very important. Cross-deputization. So the Cherokee Nation Marshal Service, once it was the modern day one, 1989, I was actually in the military. I wasn't even around. Matter of fact, most of that time I was either in Europe or the Middle East during the time of the Marshal Service inception. It went on, it grew. They started out with 4 Cherokee Marshals. When I got on in 2000, so it started in 1989. When I got on in 2000, I was Nation 9. So that means my radio number was number 9. I was the 9th Cherokee Nation Marshal in 2000. So it was a very slow growth. Okay. When I got on, it wasn't a constitutionally appointed position yet. It was just like an executive director was what you would think of the police chief, okay, for the Cherokee Nation Marshals. The man that hired me out of the military, his name was David Roberts. He was my first director of the Marshal Service. He was a mid-level supervisor for ATF. He was at Waco, Texas. He wasn't high enough at Waco to be able to do anything about it, but he was just high enough to see what shouldn't have happened. So when he became the director of the Cherokee Nation Marshal Service, he wanted a special operations team, not only to do the bad stuff that special operations teams have to do, but to know when to say no. To know when the right thing might not be to go in and do something. So whenever I came from the military to the Cherokee Nation Marshal, August 13th of 2000, I had no idea what it was to be a police officer. I was an infantryman. We ran away from the police anytime we could, okay? I knew enough about the police to know that I probably didn't want to be one because they had to write a lot of speeding tickets and people just didn't care for them, and I was right on one side of it. And I'm sad to say that the culture has changed over the years, and it is my hope that maybe the communities take on the Cherokee Nation's opinion on community and family values and being more holistic even with their law enforcement. So, start out very small. Like I said, when I got on in 2000, there was only 9 of us, and it rapidly increased under Dave Roberts. Rapidly increased. We went from 9 marshals to approximately 30 marshals in the course of about 6 months. Dave Roberts hired in guys in special operations in the military and was very proactive on building a special operations team at the Cherokee Nation. So one of the first things I was handed to me when I became a deputy marshal was a sniper rifle, my gun, my pistol, and my car. And the car was the worst of all 3 because it was this old car that they had spray painted a different color, like at Mako Body Repair, because it was gray and now it's kind of this off-white, but part of it was still gray. You kind of know those type of police cars, and it looked like it had been through a hurricane. So that was my first experience as a deputy marshal. I can tell you that in the 90s, I was in Marseille, France, running missions into Bosnia during the Bosnian crisis. And I go down the hotel that we're staying in Marseille, and on the front page of the Marseille Times, it said Cherokee Revolt. And it was during the constitutional crisis. And on the cover of this magazine was a Cherokee marshal by the name of Frankie Dreadforwater in a fight on the courthouse square for the Constitution of the Cherokee Nation. And I looked at that and I went, oh goodness. And I left it at that. Fast forward to 2000, I walk in and my FTO, the field training officer, the one that teaches you how to be a cop, is Frankie Dreadforwater. And that was my first experience with law enforcement, was this man that I seen in a paper years ago that I kind of chuckled at. And now he's teaching me what it is to be Cherokee, I have to say it, and also what it means to be a Cherokee Nation Marshal. And he's still a Marshal to this day. He's one of the 2 longest running Marshals that we have. We're kind of like the U.S. Marshals in the way that you have the Marshal, okay? And then you have deputy marshals. Everybody else are deputy. Now, we also have sergeants and lieutenants and captains, but everybody except for myself is called a deputy marshal. So I was a deputy marshal. They gave me this stick that expanded, and it was metal, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I found out it was an asp, and I was supposed to hit people with it. But that's the basis that I started this career. Every Cherokee Marshal goes to FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Artesia, New Mexico. They go for 4 months and learn what it means to be a tribal police officer. I can tell you it's not the best experience in the world. First of all, Artesia is the home of the Navajo Oil Refinery, which is a lovely place to smell when the wind is blowing one direction. And then it's also home to a large stockyard company that's fun to smell when it's blowing the other way. So whether you're going one way or the other, you get the true smell of freedom. So you go there for 4 months and you learn what it is to, 1, be a cop. 2, what it is to be an Indian cop. Artesia, New Mexico is the home to the Bureau of Indian Affairs Basic Police Academy. That's where, if you're a tribal law enforcement officer, you go there. You get your ability to get federal credentials through the Bureau of Indian Affairs so you can work federal cases on Indian country. So my organization, we have 3 jurisdictions. we have federal jurisdiction with our Bureau of Indian Affairs, so I can take cases straight to the U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute federally. We have our tribal jurisdiction through the Cherokee Nation, that I can arrest crimes on Cherokee Nation by Indians. So if it's an Indian perpetrator, I have jurisdiction, primary jurisdiction. If it is a non-Indian perpetrator on Indian country, that is state jurisdiction. So the state has primary jurisdiction if it is a non-Indian on Indian country. Now, a caveat to that is if it crosses what we consider a border of protection. What that means is long before the U.S. was the U.S. and an island country owned us, I don't know if that's politically correct, but an island country owned us at some juncture. Native Americans and colonists really didn't get along. Okay, it's not like the TV shows you see at Thanksgiving. Okay, I would like it to be, but they did not really get along with one another. Okay, so the British government came in and was this blocking force between the colonies and the Native American population, this line of protection. Okay, that was there as long as Britain was in control of us. Well, at some juncture, there was some argument over some tea or something. I'm not sure. I'm a cop, so I don't know the whole history of it. I think I slept through history in high school. But we got irritated and we kicked them out. How's that? That's the short version of what happened. So when we kicked them out, there was no line of protection anymore. So the U.S. government, in its infancy, had to step in and be that line of protection. Okay, so even to today, the federal government still holds that line of protection in Indian country. So if it's a Native American versus a Native American, so a Native American suspect and a Native American victim, it is Indians. It's my jurisdiction. Everybody kind of understand? That's kind of easy way to talk about it. If it is Native American versus non-Native American, it is my jurisdiction because the suspect is Native American, but it's also federal jurisdiction because that line of protection between colonials and Native Americans. Okay? If it is a colonial or a non-Indian versus an Indian, then it is state jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction. So there's that federal thing. So the Cherokee Nation has federal jurisdiction, we have tribal jurisdiction, and then we also hold state jurisdiction with 58 cross-deputization agreements. What that is, a government-to-government agreement that, let's take Tahlequah for an example. With this cross-step, Tahlequah can come on to Indian country and arrest Indians. Now they have to prosecute them through the tribal court. And my officers can be in downtown Tahlequah and arrest anyone. And we prosecute it through Tahlequah or Cherokee County. So at any given time, my officer can write a speeding ticket in Tahlequah or Veneta or Roland or any of the communities that we're cross-deputizing. Like I said, around 58 right now. We're crossed with all 14 counties, 2 district attorneys' districts, and 56 municipalities. Okay. So we hold those 3 jurisdictions. So it gets confusing what we need to do at times because you got to know which hat you put on. Within our agency, we have a patrol division. That's the uniform guys. Guys with uniform bulletproof vests. They got all the guns, all the Batman gear on. Then we have an investigative division that works all major crimes in Indian country. So they'll be working child molestations, rapes, murders, all that, and they take that to the federal court. We have a special operations team that was started, like I said, in 2000. It's continued today. We're the most active special operations team in the state of Oklahoma. We're busier than Tulsa PD. We have around 60 SWAT activations a year, and about 99% of those are for state land. That means a local sheriff or local police chief has called my agency and said, we need help, and we go help them. So we try to be good partners with everyone. We've done high-risk warrant services for the FBI, U.S. Marshals, ATF, all of our federal brothers and partners. So we we try to be as good neighbors as we can. That's the Cherokee way. At any time, there's a requirement through CLEAT, which is the Oklahoma Council of Law Enforcement. If they say that to be a police officer you need 24 hours a year training, we make our people have 40. If they say that they have to qualify on their weapons once a year, we make them qualify twice a year. So any qualification an Oklahoma State police officer has to have, we double it. We have to, because we always have to prove that we're as good as our non-native counterparts. Hopefully one day that won't need to happen, but at this juncture it does. But I'm very proud of my agency. I'm the second constitutionally appointed marshal by Constitution. I serve a 5-year term. The chief serves a 4-year term, so I'm a year past the chief's election. I answer to no one but the people of the Cherokee Nation. That's my job as the marshal. They did that so if there's any corruption within the administration, that does not affect me, and I can prosecute that administration without fear of reprisal. It's fantastic to have that kind of standoff from the tribe. Even though we have that standoff, we're very proud of our tribe. I have some other tribal members that are marshals, but for the most part, everyone is a Native American, and we really try to hire Cherokees, because we have Cherokee communities out there that still speak Cherokee as their primary language, and it's important that if a person comes with a gun, that person should understand the culture that they're going into, the people in the community that they represent or might have to defend. I think it's incredibly important that we keep up that ability to protect our own community. With that, is there any questions that you have for me? If I can't answer it, I'll be more than happy to find information on it, okay?
Question.
Okay.
If you're in an active crime, how do you determine if someone is Indian or not?
Sometimes we can't. You have to have a BIA card. It's a little white card that says the BIA has said that you have a certain degree of Indian blood. And it'll say the tribe that you're associated to. Okay. Now, it is a two-pronged test, just like if there's any officers in here, you know what Miranda is. To be an Indian for prosecution, you, one, have to have a card, a degree of Indian blood in you. Okay? So the BIA, you have to, this little white card that says, I'm 1/4 Cherokee. So first prong for this test, you have to have one of those. Second prong is you have to be a member of a federally recognized tribe. So I have to have this BIA card that says I'm 1/4 Cherokee, and then I have to have a membership card from the Cherokee Nation. If I have both of those, I am Native American for prosecution. Okay? If you have a degree of Indian blood, but you're a member of a state-recognized tribe, you're not Indian. Okay? Now, I know somebody might want to argue with me. That's federal law, okay? That's just what I have to deal with, okay? Does that kind of answer that?
But, while a crime is being committed, is the Indian supposed to hold up his card?
No, what we do is, that's why cross-dep is so important, the cross-deposition agreements. At 2 o'clock in the morning when that crime is going on, you don't have time to go. A lot of the people we deal with, we know are Native American, okay? But you might not know in this house. It allows us to stop the crime, and then we start doing registrations back after we fix the problem. So this person's fixed in jail, and then we go on the backside to see, is this person Native American? Yes. We send them through Cherokee court, or is this person non-native? We send them through whatever jurisdiction we're in. Does that make sense? Okay.
The question I have has to do with the court. What is the structure, pardon my ignorance,
That's right.
what is the court structure that you are dealing with when you bring something, is there a
Okay.
jury?
Okay, that's a fantastic question. We model it off the U.S. courts. So we have district courts, which would be like the U.S. District Court in Fort Smith. So we have the district court, then we have the Supreme Court, which is the appellate court. So we'll have district judges that handle crimes, and then that can be brought up to the Supreme Court for appeal. So you don't have to as an Indian tribe, but we have adopted the U.S. Bill of Rights. So if you have a First Amendment protection in Tahlequah, you have that same First Amendment protection in Indian country for the Cherokee Nation. If you get free counsel, you get free counsel in the Cherokee Nation. So we have modeled our form of government off the U.S. government. So if you can kind of look at the Bill of Rights, it's going to be the same over here. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Any other questions? Oh,
I'm a little curious about, after the removal act was passed,
yes.
some Cherokees stayed on the East Coast,
Yes.
some were removed,
Yes.
and the same thing happened with the Choctaw. Why?
That's not a question I can answer. At the end of the day, I'm a cop. I would say it probably had to do with economics. I mean, I don't know. I wish I could know. We had different routes that we took. So it wasn't just today and then we're done. It was a multi-stage thing that they did. So I can't answer that.
Right now there's a Mississippi band of Choctaw.
There is. Yeah, there's the Eastern Band of Cherokees, okay? The Cherokee Nation is in Oklahoma. The Eastern Band of Cherokees in Georgia, North South Carolina, they're the Cherokees that didn't go on the trail, okay? They're considered the Eastern Band. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, kind of along the same lines as that question, is there Cherokee land that you have jurisdiction over that's outside of Oklahoma?
No, none at all. Yeah. Now, the Eastern Band has their own police department, and they're actually called Light Horsemen. I think it's just because they don't have that connection with the U.S. Marshals that we had at the turn of statehood. But they have their own Indian country there that the Eastern Band has charge of. We don't have jurisdiction there. Now, we do. They have a big celebration every year, and sometimes they'll ask our marshals to go, and we will send a couple to go help them. One of the things with our BIA commissions is I had my special operations team in New Orleans during Katrina. They were down there about 5 weeks in New Orleans. I had them at Joplin. They were there 6 weeks working in Joplin. Here recently, I had 2 teams in Houston and a team in Florida for the hurricanes there. So we have a very broad span. There was a school shooting at Red Lake, Minnesota. I had 3 of my special operations team guys up there for almost a month. So the BIA will call us and say, hey, can you go to North Dakota for a month? And if we have the manning that we can send them, we'll send them. So does that kind of, you know? Okay. Anything else? No?
Mr. Buell, I want to compliment you on your qualities of observation. When you very first began your speech, you mentioned the gentleman that had a badge over their left chest. I would like the 2 characters tucked over here in the corner to stand up and identify themselves and tell you why they're wearing that badge over their left breast.
Well, I know why one of them is, but.
This is Marshal Ken McFerrin. He was with the Arkansas State Police for most of his career in law enforcement. And then, after he retired, he became the Chief of Police in Ozark. And then he was named the U.S. Marshal for the Western District of Arkansas. And so he's been around a long time. And I tell people, as many times I get asked, whose idea was it? It was Marshal McFerrin's idea to have Fort Smith at least bid to be the location of the U.S. Marshals Museum. Now, I say it was his idea. One day I was sitting in his office while he was still there and I had been appointed. And he told me that there was a move on to create a U.S. Marshals Museum and that I, as the incoming marshal, might be interested in that because he didn't have enough time left in the service to make it happen. So he handed the baton to me, and we went from there. And my name is Dick O'Connell. I was the most recent past U.S. Marshal for the Western District of Arkansas. I was with the FBI for 31 years, most of that in Fayetteville, and I got to know Ken during that period of time. And then I retired from the FBI, went into private business for a few years, and then I was appointed U.S. Marshal by President Bush. And now, Marshal, if I may.
Yes.
Would you please tell the audience about the conversation we had just before the program began? That was about you speaking to your friend, a deputy
Oh,
U.S.
okay.
Marshal in Atlanta.
One of my oldest friends, his name's Alec Bostick. He was a SOG commander for the U.S. Marshals in L.A. for many years. Transferred to Dallas, transferred to Houston, and he ended his career in Atlanta. So this is a U.S. Marshal that probably had never stepped foot in Fort Smith. Probably never stepped foot in Fort Smith. And when I first heard about the Marshals Museum being placed in Fort Smith, quite frankly, I was very excited. I figured it would be in D.C. somewhere, to be honest with you. So I called Alec on the phone. I said, hey, did you hear about the Marshals Museum moving to, going to be put in Fort Smith? And he said, yeah, I've heard. I said, what do you think? You know, this is a SOG commander and a U.S. Marshals Marshal. How's that? I mean, that's just, when I think of U.S. Marshal, I see this big guy that can barely fit through this door that would go after the baddest of the bad. And he goes, that's exactly where it should be, is in Fort Smith. Now, this is a man that has no ties to Fort Smith, a man that I don't know has ever stepped foot here, but knows the history of his agency and the importance of that small span of time where his fellow brothers were killed in the line of duty, and he recognized it. This is just a deputy U.S. Marshal that served his nation, served his country, and is now retired. So he's a little ahead of me. Someday I'll retire too. But so I think it's right for you all to have this here. I think that it is right in every sense of the imagination. Real quick before I get off the stage, on right, there's been a lot of things in the media here of late. I can tell you one of the organizations that we work very, very, very closely with, and I have since 2000, is the FBI. There's been a lot of talk in the media about their issues. I can tell you that every agent that I've ever dealt with loves his or her job, is professional beyond reproach, and works tirelessly in their community to make sure it's protected. Absolutely. I was never in the FBI. They don't pay me a dime to say it. I promise you. There are other agencies I would not stand up here and say that to. If you know a local FBI agent, you ought to thank them. I think they need that right now. They're good people. So, anything else? No? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marshal. Thank you, Marshal, for coming out and being with us today. We really appreciate all of you showing up for our events. This is the first part in our spring lecture series, Jurisdiction and Judgment, U.S. or Fort Smith Marshals in Indian Territory. The next one is on April 2nd. The first Monday in April, we'll have Art Burton come into town and talk to us about his new book on Cherokee Bill. There's merchandise out there if you guys want T-shirts or hats. I want to take an opportunity to say thank you to the staff of the U.S. Marshals Museum, because events like this can't happen without them. Leslie Higgins, our Director of Education, is instrumental in coming up with rich programming like this. And oh, by the way, Rick Edwards and Triple S Alarm Company, thank you for live streaming this. Hello to everybody out there. Leslie Higgins this is the brainchild of her. We have a great team with Tracy Jacobs in our administration office, with Jennifer Seaton-Rambo, our coordinator. We have over 1,000 objects in our collection that Dave Kennedy, who is also playing backup, taking pictures tonight, right here in Fort Smith. He's taking care of that collection like it's his own. And of course, Jim and Alice with the foundation who are out there doing the Lord's work, raising that money that we need so desperately to get this thing built. We are down to $19.5 million, folks, and that's a long way that we've come. I also want to call out Meredith Baldwin. She's our events and marketing manager. She's the one that made all the T's cross and the I's dot for tonight's event. So please make sure you take time to thank her. And anybody that I've missed, this is such an amazing team that we have. Thank you again very much. April 2nd, Cherokee Bill, merchandise out front. Thank you again. Have a great night.